Dear students, my name is Dr. Ahmad Raza. I welcome you to another session on the development of social thought and classical theory. Today I am going to discuss briefly about some of the important ideas of Karl Marx, his economic, his political and his social ideas. All these three ideas are interlinked. Karl Marx was born in Germany in 1818 and he died in England in exile in 1883. His major work is Capital. It's a book known as Capital, and the subtitle is Contribution to the Critique of Political Economy. Although he was trained as a lawyer and a philosopher, but his main interest was in the evolution and growth of society, how the society has developed and evolved and how it has come to take its present form. So, he was particularly interested in the material conditions and the material evolution and development of the human societies. The book as I referred earlier, Capital, in this book he comes up with a very revolutionary and very interesting thesis, and that idea became the basis of a great revolutionary movement in the contemporary, from the 19th century onwards into the 20th century, and even today that idea is alive, and that is the Communist International or the Communist movement, which I will discuss shortly. Now, in Capital, Karl Marx comes up with this great insight that the social production of the way social relations are defined and interconnected, they produce economic and capitalistic value, and it is on the basis of that value then that a legal and political structure or system is constructed and a superstructure is constructed, and on the basis of which the human consciousness is defined. So, you can say that it is a three-level sort of transformative, social transformative relationship, interconnected relationship, that the social production of relation, for example, at the level of, if you look at the level of hunting gathering society, which was the initial form of human social organization, what you find that there is a band of hunters, there is a leader, then there are 2-3 members of that band, and they go out to do hunting, or they go out to collect food, and then they bring it back to their tribe or to their family, and then on the basis of those socially produced relationships of productivity, they divide and they distribute that food or that hunt among themselves. So, the leader, he used to get more share along with those who cooperated and helped him in finding out the prey or the hunt, and then what was left was distributed to their families, to their wives and to their children. So, this is what he means, that the social production of relations, human relationships. Now, this social production of productive relationship, then with the passage of time, it became more complex, it became more evolved, it then moves on to the horticultural society, in which people cleared a piece of a slash and burn economy, in which people would burn a large patch of land on which plants or shrubs are growing. They would burn them, and then they will cultivate some crops to sustain their lives. social production of relations became more complex at the slash and burn economy level. Then on the horticultural level it moved, then to the nomadic or the pastoral level, when people were going around and grazing, controlling and fighting for large pasture lands. They were rearing flocks and animals and going along on their horses, and they in the process they also built great empires and great cultures and civilization. From nomadic and you can say pastoral social relations, the human society moved on to the agricultural, which you can say was the moment in history when the concept of private property and the concept of money and capital became important, which then during the Middle Ages moved into feudalism, and from feudalism into the 18th and the 19th century and the 20th century it moved on to through industrial revolution. The social production of relation changed, and the new classes which emerged were bourgeois and the proletariat. Bourgeois was the new business class, the new economic class, the new capitalist class of the 19th century, and proletariat was the working class. So Marx said that if the working class, if the proletariat and the laborer could understand, could become fully conscious of his or her labor, the value of his or her labor, they can then overthrow the control and the hold of the capitalist class. Those who own the productive relation of capital, and through the power of the productive relation of capital, they control the different levels of society, whether it is religion, whether it is ideology, whether it is politics, whether it is the moral and ethical values. They control it because they have money, they have capital. So the social productions of relations, beginning from the family, then moving into larger society, they how then authority and the capital is distributed depends on the social organizations of productive relationships. The social organization of productive relationships lead to the political authority, to the legal system, that who will control what. Those who have the authority to, those who can hunt, for example, those who can cultivate large pieces of land, those who can do business on a large scale, they then define the laws and the morality and the legal system of the society. This is what Marx argues. And then on the basis of that, the next level is the level of social consciousness. Those who have money, who have resources, they control the political and the legal and the religious system of the society, and then in turn they also shape the collective consciousness, the social consciousness of the society. How the member of a society will define his or her existence, social existence within the larger social system. So economy followed by politics, followed by ideology. Ideology in Marxist view, in Marxian view, is the product of the economic conditions. Economic conditions. And in his another important concept of which he developed in his book, his Capital, the critique on the contribution towards the critique of political economy, was the idea of surplus value. He says that it is the surplus, socially produced surplus value of the laborer. What is the surplus value? That he is working more but he is getting less. The capitalist, the money lender, the money holder, the man who owns the capital is paying him or her less than the labor he is investing. One, and number two, it is the human labor which creates the surplus value, which creates the new capital. If there are no workers, if there are no laborers, capital cannot create a new value. You see, the form of laborer, the form of worker can change. From factory workers, it can go on to the level of computer operators, scientists, and other innovators and innovators. Normally, you observe that people who create or do something, they do not own anything, they don't have any money, they don't have properties. They have this mental power, they have this mental energy, while the real power, the real control is in the hands of the capitalists, those who have money, those who have resources. So, the form and the shape of the social relations of production, they can change, they can have different meanings, they can have different forms in different contexts, but their fundamental economic relationship remains the same, that is the relationship of a capitalist and the proletariat, bourgeois and the proletariat. Bourgeois means middle class businessman, mercantile class, and proletariat means the working class. Now, the revolutionary idea, which the revolutionary insight which Marx has given to the world is that he argues that if the proletarian could realize their uniformed and their unified consciousness that they are a class, they belong to a class, if they can become fully aware of their social consciousness as a value creating force, as a value creating social organization, then they can overthrow the power of the capitalist and the bourgeois, and a socialist mode of production and a communist society can then be established, in which there are no classes, in which the private property is abolished, and in which relations of productions are owned by the society collectively. There is a social ownership instead of private and personal ownership as we see in the capitalism. So, this was a big revolutionary idea, and it was on the basis of this idea that he wrote his famous Communist Manifesto. And in the Communist Manifesto, what he says is that hitherto history of the world is the history of class war, that it is between the entire history and its evolution, the entire history of human beings and human societies, the history of human civilization has been nothing but the unfolding of the class war and the class conflicts. Those who owned and controlled and possessed the resources, the money, the capital, and those who were resourceless, moneyless or capitalless. Those who have the propertied class and the ex-propertied class, the capitalist class and the proletarian class, the moneylenders and the borrowers. So, it has always been a dialectical struggle between the haves and the have-nots. What is important in the thought of Karl Marx, that he hearkens the workers and he invites the laborers to self-realize themselves, so that their alienation from their act of work, the labor they apply to produce something valuable, that alienation is overdone through their self-consciousness as a class, and once they become self-conscious of their proletarian class origins, they can overthrow the exploiters and the propertied class, which is the capitalist. That is the revolutionary idea, and it is to these revolutionary ideas that even the poet philosopher, our poet philosopher Iqbal has referred. He said in Urdu, "Gaya daur sarmaya dari gaya," that the time and the age of capitalism is gone. When the Russian Revolution took place in 1917, Iqbal wrote this poem and he said, "Gaya daur sarmaya dari gaya, tamasha dikhakar madari gaya." The juggler, the showman has gone, the capitalist has gone. Similarly, जिस खेत से दहकां को मुयस्सर ना हो रोज़ी, उस खेत के अरकोशाए गंदम को जला दो, is also this verse is also inspired by the ideas of Karl Marx. At another place in Persian, he says that Marx पैगंबर नीस्त पैगंबर नीस वले dar bagal katab daurat, that he was not a prophet. Marx was not a prophet, but he had a book. He was referring to Capital, because this book has changed and transformed the history of the world for the last 150 years. And this was the book which was at some time was even banned in certain countries of the Europe, and the Communist Manifesto particularly. So Marx not only believed in the theoretical and conceptual understanding of the plight and suffering of the working and the laborer class, he also came up with a practical idea. He said that the task of the philosopher is not just to understand the world intellectually, philosophically, but the real task of the philosopher is to apply those ideas and change it. Change it. So you can say that Karl Marx was a man of action, and in order to realize the real transformative power of his ideas, he established then Communist International with his friend, another friend, Friedrich Engels, and they started revolutionary struggle not only in Europe, but that Communist International then spread throughout the world, to India, to China, to Latin America, and the world witnessed that at the beginning of during the 19th century, there were during the 1848s, the famous decade of the European revolutions in Germany, in France, in other parts of the world, although they failed, but they created a new consciousness, class consciousness among the working classes of the Europe. Then that consciousness, through the social democratic movement of the Europe, spread to Russia, which then again materialized in the form of Russian Revolution, famous Bolshevik Revolution under the leadership of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and then strengthened by the ideas and works of and actions of political actions of Joseph Stalin. Then similarly, the Marxism was exported to China, and Mao Zedong reinterpreted Marxism in the light of the Chinese economic conditions, and he said that it is the peasant class who are the vanguard of the Communist revolution in the Chinese society. Similarly, in India, Satyaram and other people, they established the Communist Party of India, and up to 1947, there was a struggle going on to establish a communist revolution in India. That was then Communist Party, when India and Pakistan came into being, was split into two parties, Communist Party of India and Communist Party of Pakistan. Communist Party of Pakistan was led by Sayyid Sajjad Zahir and certain. And the struggle goes on. But what is important about Karl Marx's idea is that it is the economic conditions which shapes the social and the political and the legal system of the society, and that then goes on to shape the collective identity, the social consciousness, the collective consciousness, or the consciousness of human beings. That what they are, how they are, and what is the role of what role they are going to play, what kind of system they are going to choose and live. Is it going to be a liberal democracy, or is it going to be a socialist heaven? Are the means of productions going to be owned by the individual, private property, individual ownership, or they are going to be owned by the state, by the entire society? So we see that some of his ideas were then implemented in Soviet Union under Lenin, and then Stalin. Stalin particularly undertook a heavy collectivization. The entire land of Soviet Union became the state property, and large farms were established, and then an industrial revolution was sort of launched into Soviet Union. But what is important is here that the nature of industrial revolution in Soviet Union was entirely different from the industrial revolution taking place in Europe. In Europe, it was the capitalist who was controlling and leading the revolution, and the laborers and the worker and the working class was serving the capitalist, those who had the control of resources and the money and the capital. While in the Soviet Union and then in China, two models of socialist revolution, it was the collective ownership, it was the state ownership. The productive relations were owned by the state, and the profit earned on those units, industrial production and the agriculture production, was then spent on the benefit of the welfare of the society, on the education, on the culture, entertainment and the living standards of the people. So, Karl Marx, you can say, was a man of great insight. He was a man, he said that Hegel was standing on his head and I have put him on his feet. That ideas are important, but ideas are the product of the economic condition. That you can say, if we simplify the entire philosophical, economic and political thought of Karl Marx, it is the economics which defines and shapes the ideology and the religion, and not the vice versa. That is why at another place he says that religion is the opium of the people, because through religion people starts to believe in their fate and they starts to believe in the status quo. And when a society and the majority of a society, and that is also used partially to explain why communism has failed in India and Pakistan, because here people are very religious, and it is very difficult for any intellectual or philosopher or leader to convince them that it is the economics which controls your life and not the ideology or the religion. That is why it has failed. So, but his contribution is unique in the history of ideas and in the history of human thinking, and he was the first man, you can say, who, although there were other political economists working in Europe, liberal economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo and so many other people, on the basis of which the liberal economic model was evolved and developed in West European and North American hemisphere. But Karl Marx gave that revolutionary socialist economic model. He was the man who said that labor is the product, the part and parcel of the existence of the working class. And the working class, the earlier the working class becomes aware of this fact, the better for them. And once they become aware of the power of their labor, then they can confront the exploitative and the exploiting bourgeois class, the capitalist class, and can overthrow them. So, objective of his whole life was to establish a proletarian revolution, revolution of the workers and the working class. That is why he said, workers of the world unite, in his Communist Manifesto. So, he says that by amplifying and by navigating through the contradictions of social and historical conditions, workers can seize and can bring a political revolution through which the lot of majority of human beings can be improved and better, changed for better. He was a great humanist, you can say. He was a materialist, but at the same time an idealist and a humanist who believed in complete equality, complete brotherhood and complete sharing of the resources, and a thoroughly committed to anti-capitalist society. That is why he presented the idea of a communist society. And in communist society, once the social relations of production are socialized, controlled by the society or the group of proletarian, then in the next stage, Karl Marx, what he envisages is that then the control of society, the controlling power disappears in communism, and all the human beings, that is why I have called him the idealist, that all the members of the society, they become self-aware and they cooperate and support each other in a spirit of comradeship in a spirit of brotherhood. As a brotherhood, they become a, and then you don't need a, you can say, a political government or a legal authority to run the affairs of the state, but on the other hand, a classless society is achieved when all the means of production and their control is fully abolished. So, a great revolutionary, a historian, a sociologist, a philosopher, a man of ideas who influenced generations of people throughout the world, and even today in Europe and North America, you know, people on the left and people on the other, you know, revolutionary agendas are inspired in one form or the other by the revolutionary ideas of Karl Marx, and they are struggling and striving for that. Even in Pakistan and India, you find people who are working for the betterment and for the uplift of the society, and which are commonly known as the leftists. So, you can disagree with their political philosophy and their methodology, but you know, in a democratic state and in a democratic society like Pakistan, like India, like Europe, everyone has a right to present his point of view and live according to that, a struggle for that. So, I mean, there is nothing wrong in it that if within the political system the Communist Party also comes in and works for the betterment of the society within the framework, legal and constitutional framework of any society. So, you can say that Marxism provides a way, provides an insight into the inequalities and into the exploitative domination of the capitalism and the capitalist society, and how it alienates a person from his product, his work of labor, and how then a deluded and disillusioned consciousness is created, in which an individual is unable to understand his real existence, his real worth. He or she is unable to become self-conscious, which Marx says is only possible if you realize that you are part and parcel of the productive process, and that by creating value and integrating value with your own self or being, you can better the human society. Thank you very much. If you have any question, you are welcome.